In the early hours of April 9, 1940, as a thin veil of fog clung to the icy waters of Norway's fjords, the neutral nation awoke to the thunderous roar of foreign guns. German warships, sleek and shadowed against the pre-dawn light, sliced through the coastal defenses like knives through parchment. These were the vessels of Operation Overrun, a bold and unprecedented assault that would forever alter the course of World War II in Scandinavia. At the heart of this invasion were Norway's coastal companies, small, dedicated units of infantrymen, artillerymen, and sailors tasked with guarding the nation's rugged shoreline. These formations, drawn from the Norwegian Army's regional divisions and naval garrisons, were the first line of defense against any seaborne threat. Yet, in a matter of hours, many of these companies were overrun, their positions silenced, and their men scattered, captured, or lost to the depths. This swift disappearance of entire units into the chaos of battle marked them as one of the war's earliest enigmas, units considered lost not merely due to defeat, but because their fates were pieced together from fragmented radio transmissions, survivor accounts, and the grim evidence of sunken ships and abandoned forts. The story begins in the northern port of Narvik, a vital hub for Sweden's iron ore shipments, where the Norwegian 6th Division's coastal elements stood watch. Here, companies from the 13th Infantry Regiment, including rifle platoons and machine gun detachments, manned positions along the Ofot Fjord. Commanded by Colonel Conrad Sundlo, the garrison numbered around 400 men, equipped with rifles, a handful of machine guns, and light anti-aircraft pieces. They were supported by the aging coastal defense ships Eidsvold and Norge, each crewed by about 250 sailors functioning as company-sized naval units. As German destroyers from the 3rd Mountain Division slipped into the fjord under cover of darkness, the Norwegians issued challenges. Captain Odd Isaacson Willoch on the Eidsvold demanded identification, but the response came in torpedoes. The ship exploded in a fireball, taking most of its crew to the bottom. Moments later, the Norge met a similar fate, its hull ripped open by German fire, resulting in over 200 deaths. The land-based companies, caught in the crossfire and threatened with bombardment, offered token resistance before Sundlo ordered surrender by 6:15 a.m. These units vanished as organized forces, survivors were disarmed and interned, while others fled into the snowy hinterlands, their whereabouts unknown for days. Historians later noted how this rapid capitulation left Narvik's defenses in tatters, allowing General Edward Dietl's 2,000 troops to secure the port, but at the cost of isolating the Norwegian companies in a fog of uncertainty. Further south, in the Trondheimsfjord, similar scenes unfolded with devastating precision. The 5th Division's coastal batteries at Agdenes and Bredingen, manned by small artillery companies of about 35 men each, were the guardians of this strategic waterway leading to Trondheim. These units, under local commanders like those reporting to Major General Jacob Vindenhaug, relied on outdated 150mm and 210mm guns, with minimal infantry support. As the German heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper and its escorting destroyers charged through the fjord at 4:30 a.m., the batteries opened fire, scoring minor hits. But German gunnery was superior. A precise shot severed the searchlight cables, plunging the defenses into darkness. By late morning, the positions were silenced, and the garrisons, over 300 men in total, surrendered after brief infantry skirmishes. The mobilization center in Trondheim fell intact, yielding supplies to the invaders. Elements of the 3rd Dragoon Regiment, including cyclist squadrons and mortar troops near Verdalsøra, attempted to rally but were pushed back, their companies fragmenting under Luftwaffe strafing. These units were deemed lost because many soldiers, cut off from command, either retreated chaotically or were captured en masse, their last radio logs pleading for reinforcements that never came. In Bergen, the 4th Division's shore batteries presented a fiercer initial challenge. German Gruppe 3, comprising light cruisers Kuhn and Königsberg, approached the harbor at dawn, only to face accurate fire from the coastal guns. The Königsberg was hit multiple times, limping away damaged, but Luftwaffe bombers soon arrived to pound the fortifications. The garrison companies, small groups of artillerymen and infantrymen totaling perhaps 200, fought valiantly but were overwhelmed within 24 hours. Survivors recounted how the positions were stormed by German troops landing unopposed nearby, leading to the unit's effective dissolution. Similarly, in Stavanger, the Sola airfield's defenses, 2 machine gun posts manned by a training company of about 50 men, were obliterated by Messerschmitt fighters and paratroopers. The battalion mobilizing there from the 5th Division arrived too late, its companies scattering in the face of airborne assault. These overruns highlighted the vulnerability of isolated coastal units, which disappeared from the order of battle as quickly as they were engaged. The most dramatic resistance occurred in the Oslo Fjord, where the 2nd Division's forts like Oscarsborg stood as formidable barriers. Under Colonel Birger Eriksen, the fortress's artillery company fired its ancient 280mm guns and torpedoes at the approaching German cruiser Blucher at 4:21 a.m., sending it to the bottom with over 800 souls aboard. This delayed the main assault on Oslo, but nearby positions at Overrun and Norway were bypassed or neutralized by smaller German vessels in their attacks. Paratroopers seized Fornebu airfield after downing several transports with anti-aircraft fire from a reinforced company of 300 men under Major Holtermann, but the defenders were soon overrun. In Kristiansand, the 3rd Division's batteries at Otteroy repelled initial landings, damaging the cruiser Karlsruhe, but confusion over orders not to fire on Allied ships and German use of captured codes allowed troops to pour ashore. The garrison surrendered by 11 a.m., its companies fragmented and lost amid the chaos. What made these Norwegian coastal companies lost was not just their physical defeat, but the manner of their vanishing. In a nation caught unprepared, with mobilization only partially complete and communications hampered by poor weather and German jamming, entire units ceased to function as cohesive entities. Some soldiers perished in the sinkings, like the crews of Eidsvoll and Norge. Others were captured in droves, as in Trondheim's batteries, still more retreated into the interior or toward Sweden, evading patrols but leaving their fates undocumented for weeks. Battlefield recoveries later revealed mass graves and wrecked equipment, but initial reports were sparse. Eyewitness accounts from survivors, such as those from Oscarsborg who escaped to fight another day, contrasted with the silence from overrun positions. Military archives, including after-action reports from the Norwegian General Staff, noted the shock of the invasion. Norway's 52,000 partially mobilized troops faced 120,000 Germans with air superiority, leading to rapid isolation of coastal defenses. This opening salvo of the Norwegian campaign exemplified the Blitzkrieg's ruthlessness, where speed and surprise rendered traditional defenses obsolete. The coastal companies, undermanned at 1/3 strength and lacking modern anti-aircraft guns or mined harbors, stood little chance. Their story is one of quiet heroism amid overwhelming odds, a reminder of how neutrality could crumble in hours. As the sun rose on April 9th, the fjords echoed with the sounds of occupation, and the lost units became symbols of a nation's sudden plunge into war. Yet, their sacrifice bought precious time for the Norwegian government and royal family to flee, preserving the flame of resistance. The disappearance of these companies raised immediate questions. How had a neutral country been so swiftly breached? What became of the men who vanished in the fog of invasion? These queries linger, drawing us deeper into the annals of history to uncover the full measure of their stand. But events were about to shift rapidly, as the broader context of Norway's military preparedness and the German strategic imperatives came into sharp focus. To understand the fate of these Norwegian coastal companies, we must first step back to the years leading up to that fateful April morning in 1940. Norway, a nation of fjords, mountains, and resilient people, had long cherished its policy of armed neutrality. This stance, rooted in the aftermath of World War I, meant maintaining a modest military capable of defending its sovereignty without provoking aggression. The Norwegian army, organized into 6 regional divisions, was designed for territorial defense, with coastal units forming a critical component. These companies, typically 100 to 250 men strong, drawn from infantry regiments, artillery batteries, and naval garrisons, were established in the interwar period as part of a broader fortification effort. Formation began in earnest during the 1920s and 1930s, when Norway invested in updating 19th-century coastal forts along its 1,500-mile shoreline. Units like those in the 6th Division in the north or the 2nd Division around Oslo were recruited locally, often from fishermen, farmers, and reservists who knew the terrain intimately. By 1939, as tensions rose in Europe, these companies were integrated into a mobilization plan that aimed to swell the army from a peacetime cadre of about 19,000 to over 100,000, though budget constraints and political hesitation kept them under strength. The commanders of these units were seasoned officers, many with experience from Norway's brief independence struggles or international observer roles. In Narvik, Colonel Konrad Sundlo led the local garrison, a man known for his administrative diligence but later criticized for his decisions under pressure. Overseeing the broader 6th Division was Major General Carl Gustav Fleischer, a strategic thinker who emphasized northern defenses against potential Soviet threats but found himself pivoting to face Germany. In central Norway, Major General Jacob Vindenhow commanded the 5th Division, responsible for Trondheim's approaches, while Colonel Birger Eriksen at Oscarsborg Fortress exemplified the grit of fortress commanders, drawing on decades of artillery expertise. These leaders operated under the Norwegian General Staff in Oslo, headed by figures like Major General Otto Ruhe, who advocated for modernization but faced parliamentary resistance. Missions for the coastal companies were straightforward yet vital: man the forts, batteries, and patrol vessels to repel any naval incursion, protect key ports like Narvik for iron ore exports, Trondheim for transportation hubs, and Oslo for the capital. They were to delay invaders long enough for full mobilization and Allied aid, using choke points in the fjords to their advantage. Training for these units was rigorous but limited by resources. Recruits underwent basic infantry drills in regional camps, focusing on marksmanship with Krog-Jørgensen rifles, machine gun operation, and artillery handling for guns dating back to the 1890s. Naval elements, like the crews of the coastal defense ships Eidsvold and Norge, practiced gunnery and torpedo launches in peacetime exercises, but joint operations with land forces were infrequent. Anti-aircraft training was minimal, with only a few Bofors guns available, leaving them vulnerable to the Luftwaffe's modern aircraft. Operational environment played a pivotal role. The Norwegian coast, with its deep fjords, steep cliffs, and unpredictable weather, offered natural fortifications but also isolation. Units were stationed in remote forts like Agdenes or Oscarsborg, connected by radio and telephone lines that proved unreliable in storms or under jamming. Logistics relied on local depots, such as Elfgardsmen near Narvik, stocked with ammunition and food, but supply lines were vulnerable to disruption. Harsh winters meant training in snowshoes and skis, preparing for guerrilla-style retreats if overrun. This setup was part of Norway's larger defensive strategy, which assumed any attack would come with warning, allowing time for mobilization. However, by late 1939, as Hitler eyed Scandinavia, intelligence reports of German troop movements trickled in, but Prime Minister Johan Nygaardsvold's government hesitated on full alert to avoid provoking Berlin. The coastal companies, at about one-third strength in early April, represented the tip of the spear in a military that totaled around 52,000 partially mobilized troops by invasion day. They were equipped with outdated weapons, no tanks, limited aircraft, and forts without mines or modern radar, contrasting sharply with Germany's Wehrmacht. The broader campaign these units were entangled in was Operation Overrun, Hitler's audacious plan to seize Denmark and Norway simultaneously. Launched on April 9, 1940, it was the first major combined arms operation of the war, involving sea, air, and land forces. Germany's motivations were strategic: secure Swedish iron ore shipments through Narvik's ice-free port, deny bases to the Allies, and expand the U-boat war. Under General Nikolaus von Falkenhorst, 120,000 troops were committed, supported by 1,000 aircraft in a naval task force including battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. Denmark fell in hours, but Norway's resistance, though fragmented, lasted 2 months. The coastal companies were integral to the initial phase, defending landing points at Narvik, Trondheim, Bergen, Stavanger, Kristiansand, and Oslo. In Narvik, the 6th Division's units protected the Ore Railway. In Trondheim, the 5th Division guarded the fjord entrances. Further south, the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd Divisions manned similar positions. Formation of these companies traced back to post-1905 independence from Sweden, when Norway built a navy and army from scratch. By the 1930s, conscription ensured every able-bodied man served, with coastal defenses prioritized due to the nation's maritime exposure. Yet, political debates over neutrality versus alliance, Norway rejected League of Nations sanctions, left the military underfunded. Commanders like Fleischer pushed for better equipment, importing some Czech machine guns, but overall, the forces remained antiquated. Mission parameters emphasized static defense, hold the line, report intrusions, and coordinate with a small air force. Training camps, like those at Elfgardsmen, simulated fjord assaults, but live-fire exercises were rare to conserve ammunition. The operational environment demanded adaptability. Fjords like Alfab Fjord and Narvik funneled attackers into kill zones, but without air cover, batteries were sitting ducks. Communications depended on civilian telegraphs, prone to sabotage or overload. Logistics included horse-drawn supplies in remote areas, with depots vulnerable to capture. In the larger offensive, Overrun exploited Norway's divisions. Simultaneous assaults prevented reinforcement. Germans used deception, sailing as merchant ships or under false flags, catching sentries off guard. As Europe teetered on war's edge, Norway's coastal companies embodied quiet vigilance. Soldiers, many in their 20s and 30s, balanced military duties with civilian lives, unaware of the storm brewing. Historians note how incomplete mobilization, ordered on April 8 but mailed out, left units fragmented. This context underscores the tragedy: brave men in an unprepared nation facing a juggernaut. Yet the final hours of the unit still raise difficult questions, as we turn to the step-by-step unfolding of events on that invasion day. On the morning of April 8, 1940, the eve of invasion, Norway's coastal defenses hummed with a mix of routine and unease. Intelligence whispers from British sources had reached Oslo, hinting at German naval movements in the Baltic, but the Norwegian government, under Prime Minister Johan Nygaardsvold, opted for caution. Partial mobilization orders were issued that day, but in a decision that would prove fateful, they were sent via postal service rather than radio broadcast, delaying activation by crucial hours. Coastal companies, scattered across the fjords, remained at peacetime strength, often just skeletons of their full complements. In Narvik, far to the north, the 6th Division's garrison under Colonel Conrad Sundlo conducted morning drills, unaware that German destroyers were already steaming toward the Alfad fjord. Radio operators in forts like Agdenes near Trondheim logged routine checks, their equipment crackling with static from the approaching storm. Terrain played a silent role. The deep, narrow fjords offered ambush points, but without mine entrances or air patrols, they were highways for the bold. By dusk on April 8, German forces were in position. Operation Weserübung's naval groups, comprising battleships, cruisers, and troop-laden destroyers, had sortied from ports like Wilhelmshaven under cover of poor weather. Communications intercepts by Norwegian listening posts noted unusual activity, but no alarm was raised. Logistics for the coastal units were strained. Depots like Elfguardsmen held ammunition and skis, but fuel for the few motorized elements was low. As night fell, sentries in Oslo fjord forts like Oscarsborg peered into the gloom, their 280mm guns loaded but crews fatigued from extended watches. The stage was set for a dawn assault that would test every link in Norway's defensive chain. The invasion erupted at midnight on April 9, with the first contacts in the southern fjords. In the Oslo fjord, around 12:30 a.m., Norwegian patrol vessels spotted shadowy silhouettes approaching the narrows. Radio logs from the guardship Paul III captured the tension, a frantic transmission reporting unidentified warships before it was rammed and sunk by the German torpedo boat Albatross. This sparked alerts up the chain, but responses were piecemeal. By 3 a.m., the main German group, led by the heavy cruiser Blücher, pushed forward. Terrain here was unforgiving, steep cliffs funneling ships into range of the forts. At Bolern and Raway Islands, small artillery companies of about 50 men each opened fire with 150mm guns, scoring hits on escorting vessels but failing to halt the advance. Communications broke down as lines were cut or jammed, isolating the batteries. On the morning of April 9, precisely at 4:21 a.m., the pivotal moment arrived at Oscarsborg Fortress. Colonel Birger Eriksen, commanding a company of 280 artillerymen and reservists, made the unilateral decision to engage. Without orders from higher up, Oslo's command was in disarray. He ordered the ancient Krupp guns to fire. Shells slammed into the Blücher, igniting fires, followed by underwater torpedoes from a hidden battery that tore open the hull. The cruiser listed and sank within minutes, taking between 600 and 1,000 German sailors and troops to the icy depths. Radio transmissions from the fortress crackled with reports of success, but requests for reinforcement went unanswered. Logistics faltered, ammunition was expended rapidly, leaving the company vulnerable. This delay forced German paratroopers to seize Fornebu airfield later, but the coastal unit held its ground initially, building tension as secondary forces bypassed them via side channels. Shifting north, by 4:15 a.m., the assault on Narvik commenced. German destroyers under Commodore Friedrich Bonte entered the Alfad fjord, their decks packed with mountain troops from General Edward Dietl's 3rd Division. The Norwegian coastal defense ship Eidsvold, crewed by a company-sized force of 175 sailors under Captain Odd Isaacson Willig, hailed the lead vessel. A tense parley ensued via megaphone, with the Germans demanding surrender. When refused, torpedoes struck, exploding the Eidsvold's magazines and killing nearly all aboard. Minutes later, at 4:30 a.m., the sister ship Norge met the same end, its 190 crewmen perishing in the blast in cold waters. Terrain amplified the horror. The narrow fjord echoed with explosions, disorienting land-based companies. Sundlo's garrison, positioned on the quays and hills, received garbled radio logs from the ships before silence fell. Movements began. Rifle platoons scrambled to positions, but without heavy weapons, they could only harass landing parties. By dawn, around 5 a.m., German troops disgorged onto Narvik's docks. The I Battalion of the 13th Infantry Regiment, mobilizing at Elfguardsmen 10 miles away under Major Sigurd Ondel received urgent dispatches. With 3 rifle companies and a machine gun detachment totaling 650 men, they marched toward the town but arrived too late. Communications were spotty, runners carried messages through snow, delaying coordination. Logistics proved critical. The depot at Elfgardsman fell undefended, providing Germans with skis and supplies. Tension mounted as Norwegian machine gunners fired from ridges, inflicting casualties but unable to stem the tide. Some platoons retreated eastward along the iron or railway, evading ski patrols in the rugged mountains. In Trondheim, the chronology unfolded similarly. At 4:30 a.m. the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper, accompanied by destroyers carrying 1,700 troops of the 138th Regiment, charged the fjord entrance. Agdenes Battery, manned by a small company of 35 artillerymen, illuminated the intruders with searchlights and fired 210 mm rounds, grazing the Hipper. But a precise German shell severed the light cables, plunging the scene into darkness. By 5:15 a.m., naval gunfire silenced the guns, and landing parties stormed the positions. Radio logs captured pleas for air support, but Norway's tiny air force was grounded or destroyed early. Terrain here, wide fjord mouths, allowed bypassing, isolating the Bredingen battery further west. Movements of the 5th Division's elements, like the 3rd Dragoon Regiment cyclist squadrons near Verdalsøre, began a hasty advance, but Luftwaffe strafing disrupted them by mid-morning. Further south, in Kristiansand at 5 a.m., the 3rd Division's coastal batteries at Otteroya engaged incoming cruisers. Initial volleys damaged the Karlsruhe, but confusion reigned. Orders not to fire on potential Allied ships delayed response. German troops, using captured Norwegian codes via radio, deceived sentries. By 6 a.m., Luftwaffe bombers pounded the forts, forcing the company of 100 men to withdraw inland. Logistics collapsed, ammunition dumps were captured intact. In Bergen, at the same hour, light cruisers Kuhn and Königsberg faced fire from Kvarven Battery, hitting the Königsberg multiple times. The garrison company fought on, but aerial bombardment by 7 a.m. cracked their resolve, leading to piecemeal retreats through forested terrain. Stavanger's timeline accelerated at 8 a.m. with the war's first large-scale paratroop drop. Sola Airfield, defended by a training company of 50 men with machine guns behind barbed wire, came under attack from Messerschmitt Bf 110s. Bombs and strafing obliterated positions, allowing 150 Fallschirmjäger to land. Radio transmissions went silent as the unit was overrun. Movements from nearby battalions of the 5th Division were too slow, their trucks bogged in mud. Tension built across all fronts as isolated companies realized the scale, simultaneous assaults stretching 1,000 miles. By noon on April 9, the initial phase solidified. In Egersund and Arendal, smaller positions fell to minesweepers carrying 150 troops each, with minimal resistance from platoon-sized garrisons. Communications networks, already fragile, were severed, telephone lines cut by saboteurs or bombs. Logistics favored the invaders, captured ports yielded fuel and food. The coastal company's step-by-step erosion, from alert to engagement to isolation, underscored the invasion's precision. Yet, pockets like Hegra Fortress near Trondheim, reinforced by Major Reidar Holtermann's company, began fortifying for prolonged defense. This reconstruction captures the morning's frenzy, where time markers ticked inexorably toward occupation. But events were about to shift rapidly, as the afternoon brought consolidation and the final unraveling of these valiant units. In the afternoon of April 9, 1940, as the sun climbed higher over Norway's fractured landscape, the initial shocks of invasion gave way to a grim consolidation. German forces, having pierced the coastal veil, now fanned out to secure their beachheads, while the remnants of Norwegian companies grappled with isolation. In Oslo, by 1 p.m., the capital's defenses had largely crumbled. The sinking of the Blucher earlier that morning had bought time, but German airborne troops capitalized on the delay. Paratroopers from the 1st Parachute Regiment, after fierce clashes at Fornebu Airfield, overwhelmed the defending company of about 300 men under Major Reidar Holtermann. These soldiers, reinforced from nearby training units, had downed several Junkers Ju-52 transports with anti-aircraft guns, scattering wreckage across the runways. Last sightings of the unit came from retreating infantrymen who reported heavy casualties amid strafing runs. Radio logs from the airfield went silent by noon, as German reinforcements airlanded 3,000 men. The coastal forts like Oscarsborg, though victorious in their stand, were bypassed, their garrisons, low on ammunition, observed enemy movements from afar but could not intervene. Key turning points emerged. The loss of airfields allowed Luftwaffe dominance, cutting off the coastal companies from any hope of resupply or evacuation. Movements in the Oslo Fjord area turned chaotic. Small platoons from the 2nd Division, scattered along the shores, attempted to regroup inland. Terrain hindered them, dense forests and steep hills slowed retreats, while German patrols on motorcycles harried stragglers. Communications faltered entirely. Telephone lines to Oslo were severed by saboteurs or bombs, leaving units like those at Horten Naval Base to surrender independently. By 2 p.m., the Norwegian government and King Haakon VII fled northward by train, evading capture, but this left local commanders without guidance. Logistics compounded the crisis. Depots overrun earlier yielded vehicles to the Germans, who used them to pursue. Last transmissions from isolated batteries pleaded for orders, with one from Norway Island noting enemy infantry approaching, position untenable. These final words marked the vanishing of entire companies, as survivors melted into civilian populations or headed for neutral Sweden, their organized resistance dissolving. Shifting to Narvik in the far north, the afternoon brought a tense standoff. After the morning's naval carnage, Colonel Sundlow's garrison had capitulated by 6:15 a.m., but elements of the I Battalion, 13th Infantry Regiment, under Major Sigurd Omdal Spjeldens, pressed on. By 1 p.m., these 650 men, 3 rifle companies and a machine gun unit, had retreated eastward along the iron or railway toward Bjornfjell. Last sightings came from scouts who reported the battalion splitting to avoid German ski troops from the 139th Regiment. Terrain was both ally and foe. Deep snowdrifts slowed advances, but allowed ambushes. A key turning point was the capture of Elf Guardsman Depot intact, arming the invaders with Norwegian weapons and skis, tipping mobility in their favor. Radio logs from the retreating companies grew sporadic. One transmission at 3 p.m. reported engaging patrols, casualties mounting, request artillery support. Silence followed as batteries died in the cold. The unit's isolation deepened when German destroyers, refueling in the fjord, shelled suspected positions, scattering survivors further. In Trondheim, consolidation accelerated by early afternoon. The 5th Division's coastal batteries at Agdenes, silenced by naval fire, saw their 320 men and officers marched into captivity by 1 p.m. Last movements of these artillery companies involved desperate attempts to spike their guns, but German speed prevented it. Further inland, the 3rd Dragoon Regiment cyclist squadrons and mortar troops near Verdalsøra launched a counterattack around 2 p.m., briefly retaking a bridge. However, Luftwaffe Stukas bombed the positions, inflicting heavy losses. Communications logs captured the panic, air attack underway, retreating north, link up with Division HQ. This marked a pivotal shift. The dragoons fragmented, with platoons vanishing into the valleys. Terrain in the Trondheimsfjord region, with its wide rivers and sparse roads, isolated units, some crossed to safer ground, but many were cut off. Logistics failures loomed large. Captured mobilization centers provided Germans with maps and radios, enabling efficient pursuit. By dusk, the coastal companies here were effectively erased, their men either prisoners or fugitives. Southern ports like Bergen witnessed similar unravelings. By 1 p.m., the damaged cruiser Königsberg limped back into harbor, but German troops had secured the city. The 4th Division's battery companies at Kvarven, after morning resistance, faced infantry assaults. Last sightings of defenders came from civilians who saw small groups retreating into the hills. A key turning point was the Luftwaffe's intervention. Heinkel bombers dropped payloads that cracked bunker doors, forcing surrender. Radio transmissions ended abruptly around 3 p.m., with final messages reporting ammunition exhausted, enemy inside perimeter. Movements turned to evasion. Platoons used forested terrain to slip away, but poor communications meant no coordinated rally. Logistics were seized, ammunition dumps fueled the occupiers. In Stavanger, the afternoon solidified airborne gains. The Sola Airfield Company, overrun by paratroopers, had its remnants flee southward by 2 p.m. Last logs noted field captured, withdrawing to Egersund Road. The invading 69th Division's follow-up forces mopped up, isolating stragglers in the flat coastal plains where cover was scarce. Kristiansand's chronology reached its nadir by mid-afternoon. The 3rd Division's Otteroya batteries, after delaying the cruiser Karlsruhe, succumbed to combined naval and air assault. By 1 p.m., 1,100 German troops were ashore, storming the positions. Key turning points included deception via radio. Germans mimicked Norwegian signals to confuse gunners. Last transmissions at 2:30 p.m. urged hold fire, possible friendlies, a fatal hesitation. Movements of the 100-man company involved a hasty inland march, but ambushes scattered them. Terrain offered little respite. Open fields exposed retreats to aircraft. Logistics depots fell, providing invaders with anti-aircraft guns ironically used against Norwegian planes. Minor ports like Egersund and Arendal followed suit. Their platoon-sized garrisons, overwhelmed by small landing parties, vanished by 3 p.m. without significant fight, their radios silent after initial alerts. As dusk approached on April 9, the broader picture emerged. Norwegian coastal companies, designed for static defense, were unsuited to fluid warfare. Last sightings across fronts painted a mosaic of desperation: soldiers on skis in Narvik, cyclists pedaling furiously in Trondheim, artillerymen spiking guns in Oslo. Pivotal factors included German air superiority, which strafed columns and jammed radios, and the surprise element that prevented reinforcement. By evening, many units had ceased to exist as fighting entities, survivors like those at Hegra Fortress under Holtermann fortified for siege, but they were exceptions. The day's toll: over 500 Norwegian dead, mostly from ship sinkings, with thousands captured. These final movements underscored the invasion's ruthlessness, leaving units adrift in history's shadows. What happened next remains one of the unresolved matters of the war, as debates over the disappearances and their causes continue to this day. The disappearance of Norway's coastal companies during the German invasion of April 1940 has long puzzled historians, not because their defeats were inexplicable, but due to the fragmented nature of the records and the debates over what precisely led to their swift unraveling. After-action reports from the Norwegian General Staff, compiled in the months following the campaign, paint a picture of units that simply ceased to exist as functional entities, their men absorbed into captivity, scattered retreats, or unmarked graves. Yet, these documents often conflict with survivor testimonies in German war diaries, leaving gaps that fuel ongoing analysis. Historians suggest that the primary cause was the element of surprise, amplified by Norway's incomplete mobilization. Official archives indicate that orders for full alert were issued on April 8, but poor dissemination, via mail rather than broadcast, meant many companies remained undermanned, operating at 30 to 50% strength. This undermanning, per analyst reports from the post-war Norwegian Historical Commission, made coordinated resistance impossible, leading to isolations where units vanished without trace. Some accounts indicate that command decisions played a pivotal role in the mystery surrounding these losses. In Narvik, Colonel Konrad Sundlo's quick surrender of the garrison by 6:15 a.m. on April 9 has been scrutinized extensively. Battlefield forensic evidence, including recovered artifacts from the Alfot Fjord wrecks, confirms heavy casualties from the sinkings of Eidsvoll in Norge, but Sundlo's actions raised questions. Historian interpretations, such as those in Geir H. Har's detailed volumes on the Norwegian campaign, propose that Sundlo's pro-Quisling sympathies, later evidenced by his collaboration with the puppet government, may have influenced his haste. Conflicting documents emerge here. Norwegian unit journals describe a threatened bombardment prompting capitulation, while German logs note minimal resistance, implying internal hesitation. Reports vary on whether Sundlo ignored pleas from subordinates to fight on. Eyewitness accounts from surviving riflemen suggest orders to stand down came abruptly, leaving platoons disoriented and prone to fragmentation. One theory proposes that this leadership vacuum caused the I Battalion of the 13th Infantry to retreat in disorder, with companies losing contact amid the snowy terrain, their fates unrecorded until post-war reunions. Further south, in the Trondheim's fjord, the mystery deepens around the rapid silencing of coastal batteries like Agdenes. Archival documents from the German 138th Regiment imply the positions fell due to superior firepower, but Norwegian survivor testimony conflicts with official reports on the timeline. Some artillerymen recounted brief but fierce exchanges, claiming they inflicted damage before naval shells forced withdrawal, yet German after-action analyses downplay losses, suggesting quicker surrenders. Historians suggest communication breakdowns as a key factor. Radio logs, preserved in military archives, show frantic but unanswered calls for reinforcement, indicating jammed frequencies or destroyed equipment. Battlefield recovery records from the 1950s, when fjord wreckage was dredged, revealed unexploded ordnance and personal effects, supporting theories of hasty retreats rather than annihilation. Analyst reports from the British Joint Intelligence Committee, reviewing the campaign in 1945, proposed that poor inter-service coordination, army batteries lacking naval support, isolated these companies, turning them into easy targets. Reports vary on sabotage. Some unverified accounts from local civilians hint at fifth column activities cutting phone lines, though no concrete evidence substantiates this beyond anecdotal diaries. In Bergen and Stavanger, the debates center on the role of air power in the unit's vanishings. The 4th Division's battery companies at Kvarven faced Luftwaffe bombings that, per forensic evidence from bomb craters excavated post-war, shattered concrete bunkers designed for naval threats alone. Historian analyses, like those by François Kerswady in his studies of the Scandinavian front, theorize that the absence of anti-aircraft defenses, only a few Bofors guns across the coast, allowed unchallenged aerial dominance, leading to psychological collapse. Conflicting documents arise in timelines. Norwegian journals log resistance until mid-afternoon on April 9, while German war diaries claim earlier capitulations. One theory proposes that misinformation via captured radios deceived gunners into holding fire, mistaking attackers for allies, a claim supported by some eyewitness accounts but disputed by Signal Corps records showing no such intercepts. Battlefield recoveries, including downed aircraft parts near Sola Airfield, confirmed the training company's valiant stand, but their last transmissions suggest overwhelming numbers caused dispersal, with platoons disappearing into rural areas without formal surrender. The Oslo Fjord engagements, particularly at Oscarsborg, offer a counterpoint where success bred its own mysteries. Colonel Birger Eriksson's company sank the Blucher, a feat documented in precise gunnery logs, yet the fortress's isolation afterward remains debated. Archival documents imply higher commands evacuation left them without orders, prompting a holdout that delayed but did not prevent Oslo's fall. Survivor testimony from the 280 artillerymen conflicts with official reports on casualties. Some claim minimal losses, others describe chaos from bypass positions. Historians suggest strategic miscalculation. The forts were built for 19th century warfare, ill-suited to combined arms. Analyst reports from the U.S. War Department in 1946 proposed that German deception, using neutral flags or false signals, contributed, though radio transcripts vary in confirming this. One theory posits that the sinking created a false sense of security, allowing paratroopers to overrun nearby airfields unchallenged, thus isolating coastal units further. Across all fronts, the overarching mystery ties to why these disappearances persist as debated topics. Incomplete archives, many destroyed in bombings or during retreats, leave holes filled by interpretation. Battlefield forensic evidence, such as mass graves near Verdosra from the 3rd Dragoon Regiment's clashes, indicates higher casualties than reported, suggesting undercounted losses. Reports vary on desertions. Some unverified diaries hint at soldiers fleeing to Sweden, but official censuses post-war show most accounted for eventually. Historian interpretations emphasize systemic issues. Norway's neutrality policy underfunded defenses, per analyses in Jack Adams' Ray's works. Conflicting documents on mobilization delays, government memos versus field journals, fuel theories of political hesitation exacerbating the overruns. In Kristiansand and minor ports like Egersund, smaller-scale mysteries mirror the larger pattern. The 3rd Division's batteries delayed landings, but rapid capitulations raise questions. Eyewitness accounts suggest order confusion, not firing on Allied ships, stemmed from pre-invasion directives, a theory supported by archival policy papers but disputed by gunners' testimonies claiming clear identification. Battlefield recoveries of torpedoes and shells imply ammunition shortages, leading to theories of logistical sabotage, though evidence is thin. Ultimately, these credible theories, drawn from historian works, analyst reports, and documented evidence, frame the coastal company's fates as products of preparation gaps, command variances, and tactical mismatches. No single explanation dominates. Instead, a tapestry of factors explains why their stories remain partially shrouded, inviting continued scholarly examination. Yet the final hours of the unit still raise difficult questions, but as we reflect on the men behind the mysteries, their legacy emerges with poignant clarity. The men who served in Norway's coastal companies were not mere statistics in the annals of war. They were sons, fathers, and neighbors drawn from the quiet fjord villages and bustling port towns of a peaceful nation. Take, for instance, the sailors aboard the Eidsvold in Norge and Narvik's Alfot Fjord. Captain Odd Isaacson Willoch, a veteran mariner in his 40s, had spent years patrolling these waters, his life intertwined with the sea that sustained his family. On that fateful morning of April 9, 1940, as torpedoes tore through his ship, he and his crew, young conscripts like 19-year-old gunner Harold Jensen from Tromsø, faced the abyss with unflinching resolve. Jensen's wartime diary, recovered from a surviving comrade, speaks of the cold dread in the pre-dawn hours, the hurried prayers, and the final shouts of defiance as the vessel sank. These were ordinary Norwegians, fishermen turned defenders, whose experiences encapsulated the raw humanity of the invasion, the sting of icy water, the acrid smoke of explosions, the desperate grips on life preservers amid the debris. Their stories, pieced together from family letters and post-war interviews, reveal not just tactical defeats but personal tragedies, widows left to raise children, communities shattered by loss. In Trondheim, the artillerymen at Agdenes Battery embodied similar fortitude. Men like Sergeant Olaf Pedersen, a 35-year-old father of 3 from nearby Steinkjer, manned the 210mm guns with hands calloused from years of labor. Eyewitness accounts from survivors describe the thunderous recoil of the cannons, the frantic reloading under naval fire, and the moment when a German shell severed the searchlight, plunging them into a darkness that mirrored their isolation. Pedersen's unit journal, preserved in Norwegian military archives, notes the dwindling ammunition and the grim decision to spike the guns before surrender. These soldiers' experiences highlight the psychological toll, the weight of knowing their stand delayed the enemy but could not prevent occupation. Families back home received terse telegrams of capture or death, igniting a quiet resilience that fueled the resistance movement. Humanizing these figures reminds us that behind every overrun position were individuals with dreams deferred. Pedersen, for one, had planned to expand his small farm after service, a future erased in hours. Further south, in the Oslo Fjord, Colonel Birger Eriksen's company at Oscarsborg Fortress offers a beacon of triumph amid the losses. Eriksen, a stoic 64-year-old with decades of service, commanded a mix of seasoned officers and green reservists, including Private Lars Hansen, a 22-year-old clerk from Drubik. Hansen's letters home, later published in historical compilations, detailed the tension of the watch, the roar of the 280mm guns as they targeted the Blucher, and the elation of seeing the cruiser founder. Yet, even in victory, the experience was laced with sorrow. The cheers mingled with the screams of drowning Germans, a haunting reminder of war's shared humanity. These men's stories underscore the emotional complexity, pride in duty fulfilled, guilt over lives taken, and fear for what lay ahead as isolation set in. Battlefield recoveries, such as personal artifacts from the Blucher wreck, including watches and dog tags, connect Norwegian defenders to their adversaries, emphasizing that sacrifice cut across lines. The legacy of these coastal companies extends beyond their immediate battles, serving as a poignant reminder of why such stories matter in our modern world. In an era where geopolitical tensions simmer, from Arctic resource disputes to hybrid warfare, their experience illustrates the fragility of neutrality and the perils of unpreparedness. Norway's rapid overrun in 1940 prompted post-war reforms, including NATO membership in 1949, shaping alliances that deter aggression today. Historians like those at the Norwegian Armed Forces Museum argue that remembering these units fosters a deeper appreciation for democratic resilience. Their sacrifice bought time for the government to escape, enabling exiled forces to contribute to Allied victories. For contemporary audiences, particularly those in nations grappling with defense budgets or isolationist policies, the tale warns against complacency. It matters because it humanizes the cost of freedom. Over 500 Norwegian lives lost in those first days, many from coastal units, underscore that peace is not inherent but hard-won. Emphasis on remembrance forms the core of their enduring impact. Memorials dot the Norwegian landscape. The sunken hull of the Blucher, now a war grave in the Oslo Fjord, draws divers and scholars alike, while Narvik's Alfab Fjord hosts annual ceremonies where descendants lay wreaths for the Eidsvoll and Norge crews. Organizations like the Norwegian Resistance Museum in Oslo preserve diaries and artifacts, ensuring the soldiers' voices echo through generations. Sacrifice is commemorated not just in stone but in education. School curricula incorporate their stories, teaching youth about moral courage amid overwhelming odds. Historical memory keeps alive the lessons. How small units, though lost, ignited a national spirit that sustained guerrilla warfare and sabotage against occupiers until liberation in 1945. For families, remembrance means tracing lineages, many descendants, using DNA in archives, uncover relatives' fates, healing old wounds. This emotional tapestry weaves into broader World War II narratives, where Norway's coastal defenses represent the war's unsung fronts. The soldiers' experiences, marked by brief heroism, profound isolation, and ultimate sacrifice, evoke universal themes of duty and loss. Why does it resonate today? In a world of instant communication and advanced weaponry, their reliance on spotty radios and outdated guns highlights technology's double edge, urging vigilance against cyber threats or disinformation that could similarly isolate defenders. Their story matters for its inspirational power, ordinary people rising to extraordinary challenges, much like modern volunteers in global conflicts. Remembrance honors not just the fallen but the survivors who rebuilt Norway into a prosperous welfare state, their economy bolstered by the very iron or routes they defended. As we close this chapter, consider the quiet graves along the fjords, where wildflowers bloom over the resting places of these lost warriors. Their legacy is a call to cherish peace while preparing for its defense, to remember that history's forgotten units shape the freedoms we enjoy. In the words of a survivor from Trondheim's batteries, inscribed on a memorial plaque, "We stood when the storm came, so others might live in calm." This emotional truth endures, binding past sacrifices to present gratitude, ensuring the Norwegian coastal companies are never truly lost but forever etched in the heart of a grateful nation.